All right, Shabbosai, good morning, good morning. Let us begin. Begin by thanking our sponsors for this morning shir, to thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Av, Paul and Kathy Pollack, in honor of their grandchildren, Tikva, Esther, Simcha, Abigail, Milana, Masanta. May they all grow up to become the best version of themselves. Truly beautiful. Our week of learning sponsors, Bill and Razi Eskin, Lezecha Nishmas, Bill's father Mordechai Ben David, and Razi's mother Sivya Bas Moshe Aaron. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the Neshamas will have an Aliyah and the families a Nechama. We will see with that. Let us begin. Thank you to Rabbi Richter for giving such a wonderful shir yesterday. Today's daf is Chaf Hey. We are picking up on Chaf Daled Amud Beis, and we are picking up at Amar Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak L'Rava. Really interesting sugyas. So we are 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 19 lines up from the bottom. So remember again, we are continuing in a fascinating sugya. Amar Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak L'Rava. Ma'u lahalos minesias kapayim liochsin. We'll say fascinating shaila. Can you go ahead and if you see someone duchni, right? Yesterday we were introduced to the sugya about establishing kohanic status. So the Gemara asks as follows. Rav Nachman says, Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak says to Rava, if you see someone duchening, can you assume that since they are duchening, that in and of itself attests to their yichus? That attests ultimately, I will say now, in yichus, in this context, what does yichus mean? Their familial status, specifically, that they are a bona fide Kohen. So you see someone duchening, could you assume that means that their yichus is fully intact and they are a bona fide Kohen? Amarle, Pulta de Rav Chisda Rav Avina. It's machlokes. It's machlokes. Do we go ahead? It's machlokes. So hilchus amai. Okay, shkoyach. What's the halacha? What's the halacha? I will say. So Amarle anamas nisa yedana. So he said the truth is I know a mishnah. Here's the mishnah. Or more appropriately a brayso. The Sanya we learned. The Sanya Rabbi Yossi Omer. Kidola chazaka. Chazaka is very powerful. Now, what is he basing this on? Rabbi said this is actually a fascinating piece. The Gemara is quoting a pasuk from Sefer Ezra. And here, the Gemara, just to give you the idea of this was happening, that they're coming back, Ezra's coming back, bringing back the wave of Jews after the destruction of the second Beis HaMikdash. So here we go. Obimnei kohanim b'nei Chavia b'nei Akot, b'nei Barzilai, asher lokach mibenos Barzilai hagila di isha. So the Navi over here is describing the following situation. They were sons of Kohanim, the sons of Bnei Chavia, right? Ultimately, again, sons of Barzilai, who took from the daughters of Barzilai as wives, Vayikra Shmam, Eile Bikshu Ksavam HaMesiach Hashim, Velo Nimtsu, Vayigalu Min HaKahuna, Vayomer HaTir Shasa Lohem, Asher Lo Yochlu Mikodesh HaKadashim, Ad Amod Kohen Urim Vitumim. Shabbos said, so long story short, Hatir Shasa. Now, who's Hatir Shasa? Rashi says over here, Hu Nechemya ben Chachalia. So, what's the interesting of Hatir Shasa was the name ultimately again for the prophet Nechemya, for the Navi Nechemya. Rabbi say, why is he called Hatir Shasa? This is incredible. We learned this actually. We saw this Gemara. Hatir Shasa is a contraction of two words. Hitir Shasa. Ultimately, again, they permitted him to drink. Nechemya was the Saramashkim. He was the, what's the Saramashkim? He was the wine steward. He was the wine steward for the Babylonian king. What was one of the obligations of the wine steward? You had to drink the wine before you gave it to the king to make sure that you weren't poisoning it. It's a little bit of a problem. What's the problem? It's asur yain nesech. It's asur for a Jew to go ahead and drink the wine of a Gentile. So again, it's a whole involved discussion. But essentially, the rabbis allowed Nehemiah, because of his position, to sample the king's wine. Hence the name Hitir Shasa. Hitir Shasa, right? Rabbis always work stuff out, right? So in other words, so they were able to allow him to go ahead and drink the wine. Hitir Shasa, incredible. So we'll say, so now what's happening? So what's happening over here is there's a group of people who's coming back with Ezra, Teretz Yisrael. They're Kohanim, or at least they claim to be Kohanim, and they want to go ahead and, of course, enjoy all of the rights of Kohanim. What was the problem? The problem is in Bavel, their fathers and grandfathers had married outside of the Jewish people. They had married converts, married other individuals, and so as such, this particular group of people, their yichus was in question. So Nehemiah says to them, listen guys, there's nothing I can do for you ad amod kohen l'urim v'tumim. The only way to sort this out is literally, again, to stand in front of the Urim V'Tumim, which represents, again, the breastplate of the Kohen Gadol, with the piece of parchment inserted inside. Only one problem, which is, there were no Urim V'Tumim in the second Beis HaMikdash, which was a nice way of Nehemiah saying to them, I can't help you. I'm sorry. There's no way to sort this out. Your yichus is in question. I'm sorry. Your kohanic status is not intact. Amar lahem. What was Nehemiah saying to them? Amar lahem. Harei atem becheskaschem. But here's what we can do. In other words, now that you came to Eretz Yisrael, you could maintain your chazaka that you had in Eretz Yisrael. B'ma hayisim ochlem bagola. What were you eating? What were you eating when you were still in Babel? You were eating what we call Kodshe HaGvul. Now, I will say Rashi says over here, Kodshe HaGvul is Truma. You were eating Truma while we were in Babel. Afkan beKodshe HaGvul. So to Eretz Yisrael, you could continue to eat Truma as well. I said the Gemara, V'isach daitcha, malim in the says kapam liuchsin, hani keven de parsiya daihu, asila sekinu. Now, I will say the Gemara says, now if you hold that halacha l'maisa, if we see a Kohen duchening, we go from duchening ultimately to establishing his genealogy. Then if we would allow these Kohanim to duchen, ultimately, again, would it not be a problem? Now, the Gemara seems to be assuming that they were duchening in Babel also. So the Gemara is suggesting over here, you see from here, that we don't, that in general, we don't say that from duchening you go to yichus. To which the Gemara says, no, shiny hacha, this case is very different. Why? The Ra'ah Chaskaihu. They will say this group was different, and this group was a self-defined known group. Since everyone knew that this group had particular genealogical issues, even if we would see them duchening, at the end of the day, we would not make the jump from duchening to yichus. Now, I will say, so I just want to point out what's fascinating over here. What we're going to see, the Gemara is going to get into is, there are a lot of things, rights and opportunities that Kohanim have. So there's duchening, there's consumption of truma, there's consumption ultimately again of sacrificial parts, there's chazeh v'shok, right, the chest and the leg ultimately of just a regular animal that's just shechted. There's a lot of different things. And so we're just trying, and we'll say, but what's the ultimate Kohanic aspiration, right? What's the crown jewel of being a Kohen? Yichus. Right, because again, if that yichus is intact, then everything else flows from that. So what we're trying to figure out from the Gemara is, if you see a Kohen engaging in Kohanic behaviors, does engagement in Kohanic behaviors establish yichus or not? So specifically, what we're focusing on now is duchening. Duchening. Now, I will say, interestingly enough, duchening is the least of it, right? Because again, what's involved with duchening? What's involved with duchening? A bracha. A bracha. And whose head is it on at the end of the day if the guy's not really a Kohen? Right? It's Kohen's head. Let's say, that's right, by the way, again, we know this already, some of this contemporarily, right? Let's say people get up and they duchen, right? Like I said, do we know that they're Kohanim? No idea. Let's say, well, I'll tell you even better. When Eliyahu HaNavi comes, is there a strong possibility that there are people who go up to duchen who are not going to be Kohanim? Absolutely. Absolutely. Just like there's going to be people who don't know they're Kohanim. Oh no, I will say, by the way, that's not, I'm going to tell you, there's going to be a lot of people trying to sort stuff out because there's going to be Kohanim who've been duchening for years who are going to be, Eliyahu's going to be like, bracha levatala. But then on the other hand, remember, there's also going to be a whole bunch of people who thought they weren't Kohanim who have been going to levayas like nobody's business, right? And then what's going to happen, right? A whole bunch of kamachas. So there's going to be a lot of this course correcting halavai. We should be zoch. It'll be beautiful to see. But a lot of this course correcting is going to happen in any event. So the Gemara is just pointing out over here that you can't bring a raya from this group by Ezra and Nehemiah, because everyone knew that this was a self-defined group whose entire chazaka, their yichos, was in question. And I will say the right to this is as follows. We're going to see there's an opinion that holds that if you see a Kohen eating truma, then that by definition establishes his yichos as well. Well, here's the problem. What did Nehemiah tell this group? What did he tell them? Whatever you were doing in Babel, you could continue to do in Eretz Yisrael. What were they doing in Babel? Eating truma. So I will say, so one second. So aren't we concerned that if we allow them to continue to eat truma in Eretz Yisrael, that someone's going to make the jump from truma to yichus? Rather, you have to say that again. This was a self-defined population that people knew about, and people knew their particular genealogical challenges. So, therefore, again, whether they're duchening or whether they're eating truma, no one is going to make the jump from truma or from duchening to yichus. Top of Chaf Hey. Elamai Gidola Chazaka. So I'll say, so what does it mean when the Gemara said over here before Gidola Chazaka, that Chazaka is strong? Listen to this. So the Gemara says, Meikara Achal B'Truma D'Rabbanan, Hashta Achal B'Truma D'Oraisa. Oh, here's what's interesting, I will say. That remember, while it's true that these guys, these Kohanim, well, we'll call them Kohanim for our purposes now, but while it's true that they were eating Truma in Bavel, I will say, what type of Truma were they eating? What type of Truma? D'Rabbanan. There's no truma da'arais in chutz. Truma is a mitzvah hatuluya ba'aretz. Right? Truma is a mitzvah that is dependent on Eretz Yisrael produce. So if they're eating truma outside of Eretz Yisrael in Bavel, that is truma d'Rabbanan. So watch what just happened over here. So Nehemiah says to them that whatever you were doing in Bavel, you could continue to do in Eretz Yisrael. So, and he gives truma as the example. But one second, in Bavel they're eating truma d'Rabbanan, and now if you let them eat truma in Eretz Yisrael, it's going to be truma d'Oraisa. So the Gemara says, Hashta achal b'truma d'Oraisa. V'bai sema, Hashta nami b'truma d'Rabbanan achal, b'truma d'Oraisa lo achal. Maybe not. Maybe what Ezra was saying, I keep saying Ezra, maybe what Nehemiah was saying to them was, no. In other words, literally, whatever you were doing in Bavel, you could continue to do in Eretz Yisrael. Specifically, you were eating Truma D'Rabbanan in Bavel, you could continue to eat Truma D'Rabbanan in Eretz Yisrael as well. The Gemara says, right, about Truma D'Oraisa lo achal. V'chi maskinon mitruma le'yochsin b'truma D'Oraisa b'truma D'Rabbanan lo maskinon. And therefore, Rabbi said this helps us avoid another issue, because remember again, as we're going to see, there is an opinion that holds that maskinon mitruma le'yochsin, that truma consumption, if you see a Kohen eating truma, that is enough to solidify his yichos. But when is that true? What type of truma? Truma d'Oraisa. That's why, again, Nehemiah was comfortable allowing this group to continue to eat Truma D'Rabbanan in Eretz Yisrael as well, because there was no concern that they would go from Truma to Yichus, since Truma to Yichus only is Truma D'Oraisa to Yichus, not Truma D'Rabbanan. Incredible. Ve'elamai Gidola Chazaka. So we'll say, if that's the case, then what does it mean when the Gemara says Gidola Chazaka, that Chazaka is so great because it allowed this population to continue? What did it allow them to continue? Here we go. The afagav the ikala migzar mishum truma d'oraisa lo gazvinan. See, I will say, I might have thought as follows. I might have thought that we shouldn't let this group eat truma d'Rabbanan, lest they what? Come to eat truma d'oraisa, and then what's the concern? And from truma d'oraisa ma'alin liyuchsin. From Truma D'Oraisa, then we would establish their yichus. So the Gemara therefore says, so the chiddush over here was, Nehemiah says to them, listen guys, status quo. Status quo. You can maintain, we can't establish your genealogy, or your yichus I should say, but Lamaisa, whatever you've been doing, continue to do. You've been eating Truma D'Rabbanan in Bavel, you can eat Truma D'Rabbanan in Eretz Yisrael. And what's the chiddush? The chiddush has been now in Eretz Yisrael, they're also going to have access to Truma D'Oraisa. We don't say that we're going to stop you from eating Truma D'Rabbanan unless you come to eat Truma D'Oraisa out of fear that from Truma D'Oraisa you'll go to Yichus. Incredible. Shabbos said, the Gemara said, but Truma D'Oraisa lo achal, is that true that they can't eat Truma D'Oraisa? Shabbos says, so just to be clear, there's two things happening over here. There's a general discussion. I will say we're in Chaf Hey Amud Aleph 2, 4, 6, 8 lines down from the top. Shabbos says, so two things happening over here. Number one is a general conversation about what type of Kohanic behaviors allow us to go ahead and what? Solidify or ascertain yichus, proper, intact Kohanic lineage. That's discussion number one. So far we've had a discussion about Truma, we've had a discussion about Duchening, we'll see more. Now we're a little bit hyper-focused on this episode in Sefer Ezra, where you have this group of people coming back with Nehemiah, and they were a group of self-identified Kohanim. The problem is we know that their fathers married out. When I say married out, by the way, married out for Kohanim, which could be marrying Gerim, which could be marrying out also, but marrying Gerim as well. So now, what Nehemiah says to them is, guys, we cannot ascertain your yichus. The only thing that can straighten this out is what? Urim v'tumim. And what's the problem? No Urim v'tumim in Bayis Sheni. So pretty much, we're going into a holding pattern. Status quo. Whatever you were doing in Bavel, you could continue to do now. Now, the Gemara says, and what were they doing in Bavel? What were they doing? Eating Truma Drabana. Now, it's also possible they were duchening. It's also possible. It's also possible they were duchening. But right now, folks, they were eating Truma Drabanan. So Nehemiah tells them, when you come now to Eretz Yisrael, you could continue to eat Truma Drabanan. What's the novelty in that? What's the novelty? We can allow you to eat Truma Drabanan, and we're not concerned that what? That you'll come to eat Truma Daraisa. Good. So the Gemara says, by the way, Truma Daraisa, is that true? That they can't eat Truma Daraisa? This group can't eat Truma Daraisa in Eretz Yisrael? But the Pasuk says, Asher lo yochlu mekodesh hakadoshim. The Pasuk says, speaking to this same group, you can't eat from the Kodesh HaKadoshim. So the Gemara says, Mikodesh HaKadoshim hu de lo achol, hab'truma da'oraisa achol. Now, we would assume, what does Kodesh HaKadoshim refer to? The Pashas, what does Kodesh HaKadoshim refer to? Karbanos. Right? So it sounds like what Nehemiah is telling them is, they can't eat from Karbanos. But what can they eat from? Truma, even what? Da'oraisa. So what's going on over here? Tushmir says, no. Haki kamar. Lo b'midi di'ikra kodesh. Nehemiah was saying to them like this: you can't eat from anything that's called kodesh. The Rabbi say, what's called kodesh? Dichsiv v'chol zar lo yochal kodesh. Rabbi say that's a reference to truma. Truma is called kodesh, so you can't eat truma daraisa. V'lo b'midi di'ikra kodshim. Nor can you eat that which is called kodshim. The Rabbi say, what's called kodshim? Sacrificial parts. So we'll say, so it's interesting. We read Kodesh Kadoshim as one phrase. The Gemara is actually saying, Nehemiah is saying it means two different things. You can't eat Kodesh, you can't eat Truma, and you can't eat Kodshim. You can't eat pieces of, you can't eat sacrificial parts either. Dechsevu baskoin kisile ishzar. Here b'trumas hakadoshim lo sochal. V'amarmar b'muram min hakadoshim lo sochal. The pasuk says, if the daughter of a kohen will marry Yisrael, she can't eat b'trumas hakadoshim. What's trumas hakadoshim? What is that? B'muram min hakadoshim lo sochal. That the parts that are given from a carbon to a kohen. Take a quick look at Rashi. Rashi says over here. V'lo b'midi di'ikri kachim afilu chazei v'shok shel shlomim hane'achalim l'noshe karnam l'abdeim. So say even something like the chazei and the shok, like the chest and the thigh of shlomim, which can be eaten by anyone in a Kohanic family, these individuals cannot eat. So therefore, again, the Gemara says no. Nehemiah was telling them you can't even eat kodesh and kadoshim. You can't eat truma, and you can't even eat the least sanctified sacrificial parts. Okay, beautiful. Tashma, chazaka lekahuna. So I will say, so again, that's the end of that conversation. So now I will say, I just want to point out, we still don't know, we still haven't answered our original question, which is truma consumption, right? Is truma consumption enough to solidify Kohanic yichus? So we have two things open so far. Does duchening certify Kohanic yichus? Does truma consumption certify Kohanic yichus? So those two things are still open. What we do have resolved is the episode in Nehemiah, where Nehemiah was telling those quote-unquote Kohanim that what could they do when they come into Eretz. So what can they do? Eat truma d'Rabbanan. That's it. That's what you're allowed to do. Good. So let's go back to Tashma. Chazaka l'kuna nesias kapayim bebavel. So listen to this. What's a chazaka for kahuna? And we're assuming chazaka for kahuna means an activity or a behavior. We'll call it an activity, right? That goes ahead and certifies kohanic yichus. In Bavel, duchening works, which means what the Gemara seems to be saying over here is that if we see someone duchening in Bavel, that certifies their yichus. Now take a quick look at Rashi. Nesias kapayim bebavel. Why is this? Rashi says, Haro'ehu no se kapav bebavel. If you see someone duchening in Bavel, Meyid alav b'chol makom shu kohen. I will say that is enough to go ahead and testify about such an individual anywhere that he's a kohen. U'mekablan himenu Lefi sheyesh sham yeshiva u beis din kavua bodkin achar nosei kapayim. Abba says, isn't this fascinating? So in Bavel, because there was a beis din in the yeshiva, they would not let people get up to duchen until they did a genealogical search, ensuring that such a person was a valid Kohen. So if you see someone duchening in Bavel, that is enough to attest to their yichus. Okay, go back to the Gemara for just a moment. We're stopping in the middle of that Rashi for just a moment. V'achilas chala b'surya. Similarly, if you see someone eating challah, now we'll say, what does challah refer to? Challah refers to the portion of the dough that you give to a Kohen. If you see someone eating challah in Surya, that is also enough to go ahead and attest to their kohanic yichus. The Rabbi said, now go back to Rashi for just a moment. V'achilas challah b'Surya, hi aram sova shekivsha David v'chibra li'eretz Yisrael v'kasaper haykana kibush yachad shmei kibush. So Rabbi said, this is incredible. So what we call Surya is Aram Sova. So Surya, Rabbi said, was conquered by David HaMelech. But unlike other conquests of David HaMelech, which was done together with the permission of the Sanhedrin, David HaMelech conquered Surya on his own. Because of that, there is a discussion about the halachic status of Surya. Is Surya considered to be halachically part of Eretz Yisrael or not? Or more specifically, does it have Kedushas Eretz Yisrael or not? So listen to this. So the Rebbe said, this opinion holds that Surya is considered to be part of Eretz Yisrael, and therefore challah consumption in Surya is da'araisa, and therefore if you see someone eating challah in Surya, that is enough to attest to his kohanic status. Third category, the chiluk matanos bekrachin. The Rebbe said, now listen to this. Chiluk matanos, the Rebbe says, zroa and lechayim. Now remember, the Rebbe said, the halacha is that stam, if you shecht an animal, every single time you shecht an animal, you are supposed to give the zroa and the lechayim to the kohen. So the foreleg and the chest goes to the kohen. Both say that's not a carbon. It's not a carbon. That stam you shecht an animal. We'll discuss whether or not or why it appears that this halacha does not apply today, because it's not dependent on karbanos and certainly not dependent on Eretz Yisrael. So Rabbi says, now listen to this. Similarly, if you see a guy who gets zroa and lechayim in the marketplaces, that is enough to establish him as a Kohen. Now, what's the pshat? Because I take a look at Rashi. Bekrachin va'afagav di isurin in Israel zarim holu krachin makom shvakim hein u'mitzuyin ba'ovrim v'shavin hamakirim bo ilav de Kohen havalo machtzif nafshei. Now, listen to this. In the cities, where there's also a lot of marketplaces, there's a lot of pedestrian traffic. So listen to this. A guy would not take kohanic portions if he wasn't really a Kohen. Why not? Why not? Because there's so much pedestrian traffic, you run the risk of being recognized as a kohanic imposter, right? If you claim to be a Kohen. So therefore, a person is not going to have the chutzpah to go ahead and claim to be a Kohen in a place where there's a lot of pedestrian traffic, unless, of course, he's really a Kohen. So now watch what just happened over here. Three different categories, three different halachas. So in Bavel, if someone duchens, that is enough to establish their kohanic status. Why? Because in Bavel, there's a yeshiva, there's a beis din. They don't let someone get up to duchen unless they first vet him. That's case one. Case two, Surya conquered by David HaMelech. This opinion holds kibush yachad shmei kibush. Conquering of David is enough to give it Kiddush Eretz Yisrael. Therefore, challah is da'araisa. If you see someone eating challah in Surya, that attests their kohanic status. And case number three, you see a guy in the city going ahead and taking the zroa and the lechaim, the kohanic gifts of the chest and the foreleg, in a place where there's a lot of pedestrian traffic, that also attests his kohanic status, because no one would have the chutzpah to do that if they weren't a Kohen. To which the Gemara says, my love liyuchsin. They will say, when we say establishing kohanic status, it's kohanic status for what? Is this not for yichus? In other words, I will say that again, you see someone duchening in Bavel, you see someone eating challah in Surya, or someone taking kohanic gifts in the large, busy cities. What does that do? What does that do? That establishes his yichus as a Kohen. To which the Gemara says, no, lo l'truma. No, that's not what it means. It doesn't mean for yichus. What does it mean? It means for truma. that halacha l'maisa, if you see any of these three cases based on duchening in Bavel, eating challah in Surya, or taking zroa and lechaim in the cities, such a person is entitled to eat truma da'oraisa. But it does not necessarily establish bona fide yichus. The Gemara says, 1 second. But it's comparable to the consumption of challah. Just like challah consumption establishes yichus. So too in this case over here, seeing someone duchen in Bavel should establish a yichus as well. To which the Gemara says, lo, achilas challah gufa l'truma. Achilas, the Gemara says, no. Actually, the consumption of challah itself only goes ahead and allows you to eat truma. Why? Because kasavar challah bisman hazeh d'rabanan u'truma daraisa. Because this opinion holds that both say presently challah, the obligation to give challah is only d'rabanan, but truma could still be daraisa. And what's the chiddush? If you see a kohen eating challah, maskinan mechallah d'rabanan l'truma daraisa. Ultimately, again, we go ahead and we elevate someone who's eating challah d'rabanan and say, oh, if you're eating challah d'rabanan, we'll also allow you to eat truma da'oraisa. And Rabbi say, this is in line with the way that Rav Huna bar Rav Yeshua switched around a ruling to the Rabbanon. What's the ruling we're referring to? Tashma. Here we go, Rabbi say. So I just want to point out, just where the Gemara is holding right now, it appears that when the Gemara said these three things, if you duchen in Bavel, right? If you eat challah in Surya, and if you take kohanic portions in the marketplaces or in busy cities, that establishes your kahuna. We thought it establishes your yichus. It turns out that no, what does it establish your ability to do? Consume truma da'araisa. Consume truma da'araisa. So I will say, which is really fascinating, because what it sounds like over here, what sounds like where the Gemara is going is, what do you need in order to establish your yichus? What do you need? What does it sound like? What do you need? Sounds like you're going to need eidos, right? It sounds like any of these kohanic, it sounds like that's where the Gemara is going, because if duchening is not enough, challah consumption is not enough, consumption of kohanic portions is not enough, like what's left? What's left? So it sounds like where the Gemara is going with everything is that to truly establish yichus, you need some type of edus. Now, I will say, edus doesn't have to be two witnesses testifying about you. Edus could also mean some type of uncontestable familial proof, a family tree, something else. But you need more than just kohanic behaviors. Okay, let's go on. Tashma, here we go. Chazaka l'kahuna nisiyas kapayim v'chiluk granas b'Eretz Yisrael. So what's listen to this? A chazaka for kahuna is duchening or consumption of truma in Eretz Yisrael. Right? This allows you to go ahead and, so I would say two things. Either if you duchen in Eretz Yisrael or you truma in Eretz Yisrael, b'Surya or b'chol makom sheshluchei rosh chodesh magin nisiyas kapayim raya. Aval lo chiluk granos. Suppose listen to this. However, in Surya, and in any other place where interesting, but when Beis Din would be Mekadesh Techodesh, and Beis Din Eretz Yisrael would establish a new month, they would dispatch witnesses, or not witnesses, messengers, to go ahead and spread the word to outlying communities. So anywhere, ultimately, again, where the messengers of Beis Din would reach, so ultimately, duchening is enough of a raya. Avalo chiluk granos, but I say chiluk granos, it's truma, but not truma consumption. Bavel kesurya, and Bavel is like Surya. Rabbi Shimon says, Af Alexandria shel Mitzrayim, even in Alexandria of Egypt, Barishona mipnei shebeis din kavuan sham. So we'll say Alexandria was also like Bavel and like Surya, because in Alexandria they had an established Beis Din. So we'll say, what do you see from here? Nisiyas kapayim. So we'll say, what do you see from here? You see from here that duchening is enough of a raya for one's kahuna. My love luyochsin. Does it not mean that if you see someone duchening, you could establish their bona fide yuchsin credentials, yichus credentials as a kohen? Lo lechala. No, what it means is, if someone duchens, that could be enough to establish their ability to consume challah. To which the Gemara says, but 1 second. But yet it compares it to the case of chiluk granas, of truma. Mach chiluk granas liyuchsin. Just like if a kohen eats truma, that's enough to certify his yichus. Af nesias kapayim liyuchsin. So to duchening should be enough to establish a zichus as well. To which the Gemara says, "Lo chiluk granos gufa lachala." No, it's not true. In fact, I will say, interestingly enough, chiluk granos, consumption of chala, is what. I'm sorry, chiluk granos, consumption of truma, is what will allow you to eat chala. What does that mean? Kasavar, listen to this, because this opinion holds truma bisman azed rabbanon v'chala da'araisa. He holds that contemporarily, presently, truma is drabanon and chala is da'araisa. Umaskinan mitruma drabanan lachala da'araisa. What's the chiddush? The chiddush is if you see someone eating truma, we could elevate them to chala consumption. Ukidashkechinu Rav Huna b'reid Rav Yoshua l'rabanan. And Rav Huna b'reid Rav Yoshua found the rabbanan. Dam Rav Huna Rav Yoshua ashkechesinu l'rabanan b'bei Rav the Yasi v'ka'amri. Rav Huna b'reid Rav found the rabbanan sitting in the yeshiva of Rav. V'ka'amri afiluman dam truma b'zman hazeh rabbanan chala da'araisa. And they said that even according to the opinion who says that contemporarily truma is drabanan, chala is da'araisa. Now, how could that be? Here we go. Shahare zayin shekibshu v'zayin shechilku. That was when Yoshua leads Klal Yisrael into Eretz Yisrael. And what was we learned this by Shalshudas last night. We did by Shalshudas. We started the Rambam Hilchos Beis HaBechira, and we saw that Rambam spoke about this zayin, this 14 years. 14 years. Right? According to the Rambam, we learned this why because what was new about the 14 years? The Mishkan was in Gilgal during those 14 years. 7 years of kibush and 7 years of chiluk. 7 years of conquering the land and 7 years of dividing the land. So we'll say during those 14 years, nischayvu b'chala v'lo nischayvu b'truma. Interestingly enough, we'll say during those 14 years, Klal Yisrael was chayiv in chala, but not chayiv in truma. Not chayiv in truma. So we'll say, so they used it as a raya to prove that what? That chala is da'araisa, while truma is d'rabanan. V'amina lahu, and ultimately Rav Huna said to them, "V'amina lahu ana adarabba." It's just the opposite. Afilu man damar truma is manazah da'araisa. Even according to the opinion who holds that truma contemporarily is da'araisa, chala d'rabanan. Chala is d'rabanan, right? Why? Disanya bevoachem ala aretz. So most of the Torah, when speaking about chala, says, when is there an obligation to have chala, separate chala? When you come into the land. If what it says when you come into the land, yachol mishenichnesu la shnaim u'shloshim meraglim. So maybe it means even when a couple of Jews come into Eretz Yisrael, it triggers the biblical obligation for chala. Talmud lomar bevoachem bebias kulchem. Therefore, we'll say bevoachem means when all of Klal Yisrael comes. Bebias kulchem amarti velo bebias miktaschem. We'll say ultimately again, when is there a biblical obligation for chala that's triggered? Only when all of Klal Yisrael is in Eretz Yisrael. We'll say, take a look at Rashi. Rashi said, last Rashi in the Daf. Kevin the Shina Kasa Biazu Lichta Babavacham Lo Kasav Kisavo Yacham Mishnisum Ragam. So there Paul said by chala, interestingly enough, you need all of Klal Yisrael in Eretz Yisrael. And therefore, the Asakinu Ezra, when Ezra brought the Jews back, Amud Beis, Lav Kulhu Saluk. They will say, ultimately, again, the majority of Klal Yisrael did not come back. Look at Rashi. Lav Kulhu Saluk, Ruban Nishru Babavel, Dechsiv Kalakal Ke'echad Arbarivo. So I will say, so ultimately, again, this is just the law. Rav Huna just reversed it. Rav Huna just said that Halacha Lamaisa, chala is d'rabanan, truma could be d'oraisa. Why is chala d'rabanan? Because Rabbi say ultimately again, what does chala require? What does chala require? All of Klal Yisrael. Rabbi say now, what does all of Klal Yisrael mean? What does all mean? All means rov. Rabbi say, which I'll tell you something very interesting. Do you know that they project in just a couple of years from now that the majority of Am Yisrael will be in Eretz Yisrael, which is a fascinating, staggering, and overwhelming statement that in just a few years, I don't know what I just saw it saying 2026, something like that. In just a certain number of years, the majority of Klal Yisrael will be in Eretz Yisrael. So I'll just point out, besides that it's just magnificently beautiful to think that the scales will tilt for the first time since the second Beis HaMikdash. I will also point out that it's fascinating to see that there may be certain halachic realities that will change as well. For example, if you hold that chala is only da'araisa when the majority of Am Yisrael is in Eretz Yisrael, then it's quite possible that Chal becomes Daraisa. Again, I'm not doing the halachic discussion justice, just pointing it out. Okay, so Tashma. So I will say, so bottom line is we're still not any closer to answering our core questions, which is what? What Kohanic behaviors, if any, establish yichus? So far, both said, let's go through the Kohanic behaviors we have so far. Number 1, duchening. Number 2, truma consumption. Number 3, challah consumption. Number 4, carbonic consumption. Number 5, chazei v'shok consumption. Remember, chazei v'shok means Kohanic portions from a non-sacrificial animal. So really, we have not established, if anything, it sounds like none of these behaviors actually go ahead and attest to yichus. What we have seen is that engaging in some of these behaviors helps for others. So for example, it is possible based on what we just learned that consumption of rabbinic challah may allow for what? Consumption of truma. But right now we haven't seen any Kohanic behavior that ultimately again solidifies yichus. Here we go, let's continue. First line, Chaf Hamid Beis. Interesting case. Here we go. Okay, good. I'm okay. Thank you. So the Gemara says as follows: Tashma, Chazaka lakuna nisias kapayim. All right, so we'll say, okay, here we go. Another statement. Chazaka for a kahuna. Now I both say, remember, more than anything, the way I want to translate the word chazaka lakuna is how? How do I want to translate that? Yichus. Right? But we're not. Chazaka lakahuna, right? Chazaka, right? Your chazaka for kahuna is nisias kapayim, v'chiluk granos, v'edos, and edos. Okay, so what the Gemara says, what's an example of something that provides a chazaka that you are a Kohen? So the Gemara gives 3 examples, right? Nisias kapayim dochening, chiluk granos, truma, and edos, and testimony. The Gemara says, edos chazaka hi? The say edos is not a chazaka. What is edos? It's edos, right? Edos, remember again, what does the word chazaka mean? What does chazaka mean? A presumption, right? Chazaka is a presumption, right? Chazaka means that there are certain things that are happening that allow me to believe that things are a certain way, right? So I see someone duchening. I understand. I see someone duchening. Oh, that's the chazaka, you're a Kohen. I see you eating truma. That's the chazaka that you're a Kohen. Rabbi say if there's eidos, if eidim show up and say this guy's a Kohen, that's not chazaka. We'll say that's better than chazaka, right? That's eidos. Elolav hachikam. That's what it means to say. Nesias kapayim ki eidos. Rather, that's what the Brisa means to say is like this, and this is incredible. Maybe duchening is just like eidos. So the Gemara says, what does that mean? Ma eidos liyuchsin af nesias kapayim liyuchsin. Just like I will say, if there are witnesses who show up and say, Aaron is a Kohen, and that solidifies his yichus, so too if we see Aaron duchening, that solidifies his yichus as well. To which the Gemara says, lo, eidos haba mikoach chazaka ki chazaka. This is fascinating. I will say, no, what it means is, if you have eidos, that is eidos on a chazaka, that's like chazaka itself, which I will say means what? Let's say witnesses show up in Beis Din and they say, we saw Aaron duchening. We saw Aaron duchening. So I will say halachically, how do we treat that? As if the Beis Din themselves saw Aaron duchening. So whatever that means, right? Whatever, in other words, edus on chazaka is like chazaka itself. Right? So therefore I will say, once again, what do we learn from this? What we've learned from this is, if you see someone duchening, or you see someone eating truma, or for that matter, witnesses show up and they say what? What are the witnesses saying? We saw Aaron duchening or eating truma. That's like chazaka itself. Now I will say, what don't I know? Right? What I don't know is what the chazaka is. What does that mean? Is that a chazaka for yichos? Is that a chazaka? But I will say, but now the Gemara is going to go on a significant tangent. Not really a tangent. It's focusing on this idea of eidos on a chazaka. Watch this. It was a great case. Great case is Ki Yehuda Asakim Rabbi Ami. I will say there was once a guy who came before Rabbi Ami. Amar lei muchzani bazeshu kohen. So we'll say the guy said before Rabbi Ami, right? This is what's happening. So guy, we'll just call him Guy, comes to Rabbi Ami, right? Guy says to Rabbi Ami, I know that Aaron is a Kohen. I know Aaron is a Kohen. Amar le Mara Isa. Rabbi Am says, guy, what did you see? What did you see? Amar le Shekari Shom Beisak Neses. He got Rishon. He got the first Aliyah in Shul. First Aliyah in Shul. So Rabbi Ami says to him, let me ask you, B'cheskas Shu Kohen or B'cheskas Shu Gadol? Did he get the first Aliyah because he's a Kohen? Or maybe he's a great Talmud Chacham? But say, look at Rashi, the second white line in Rashi. B'cheskas Shu Gadol, Kidamin Ba'alma, Rav Kari B'kahani, Va'av Gad Lav Koinu. They both say there is a concept in halacha that if in shul, there is a great Talmud Chacham, you are allowed to go ahead and give him the first aliyah. We don't generally practice this, but Lamais is possible. So Rabbi Ami says to the guy, how do you know the guy who got Rishon? How do you know that Aaron is a Kohen? Maybe Aaron is just a great Talmud Chacham. Listen to this. Shakara Acharav Levi Ve'elo. Oh, I tell you why. The guy who got the second aliyah was a Levi. The Rabbi said it's actually a very interesting halacha. And both say that halacha lamaisa, the only time there's an obligation to give the Levi sheni is when you gave a Kohen rishon. And both say, by the way, this happened. It doesn't happen in our shul because Baruch Hashem, we are blessed. We are blessed with a prolific. The Kohanim are everywhere in this place, right? Anywhere you turn, you bump into. Let's say, so I'll point out something very interesting, which is the concept of a Kohen Levi Yisrael model ultimately is predicated on a Kohen getting rishon. Once a Kohen doesn't get Rishon, what we call nifseka hachavila. Literally, again, the chain is broken. And at that point in time, so let's say there's no Kohen in shul. Once no Kohen in shul, so you could give a Levi Rishon, but you don't have to give a Levi Rishon. You give anyone Rishon, and then at that point in time, you can give anyone anything. So therefore, again, what this guy was saying to Rabbi Ami was, look, they gave a Levi Sheni. So if it was true that Aaron wasn't a Kohen, and he was just, let's say, a great Talmud Chacham, then halacha l'maisa, they could have given anyone Sheni. The fact that they gave a Levi Sheni indicates to me that what? That Aaron was, in fact, a Kohen. Pretty incredible. So take a look at Rashi. Shkar achrav Levi, v'ilav Kohen hu ein Levi kori achrav. Darminu Mesechus Gittin, im ein shan Kohen v'sparda chavila, or mifarshinan de ein Levi kori b'makom she'en Kohen. V'yesh mifarshim, nisparda chavila she'makom she'en Kohen, in Rotzi Yisrael likros lifnei Levi kori, v'dafka de ein sham Kohen. I say the ideal here is if there's no Kohen, everything kind of falls, not everything falls apart. You no longer have to follow the normative framework and can give anyone aliyahs. Good. So we'll say, why are you bringing this story? Because Lamaisa again, the guy is coming before Rabbi Ami, and he's saying to Rabbi Ami that halacha Lamaisa. So we'll say, let me just clarify. So if let's say you have a Kohen, but you have no Levi, right? So what's the minhag Yisrael? The minhag Yisrael is we give the Kohen bimkom Levi. If there's no Kohen, there's no such thing as giving Levi bimkom Kohen. Sorry, guys. Sorry, Leviim. Right? Kohanim could be stand-in for the Leviim, but the Leviim cannot be stand-ins for the Kohanim. So there's no such thing as a Levi bimkom Kohen. This is often misunderstood. There's no such thing like that. Right? In fact, if there's no Kohen, who do you give an aliyah to? Anyone you want to. Now, can you give it to a Levi? Sure, of course you can, but there's absolutely no imperative to search out a Levi over anyone else. Good, it's just halacha. So we'll say, so what happened? Ve'lo Rabbi Ami lakuna alpiv. What's the end of the story? Rabbi Ami certified Aaron as a Kohen based on the testimony of this guy. So if Rabbi say the idea over here is this is an example of edus ana chazaka. Right, so the guy was showing up in front of Rabbi Ami, and what was he saying? I saw the guy get the first aliyah. This is Eidus Ana Chazaka, and Rabbi Ami certified him as a Kohen. And I both say, once again, what's missing from the story? What don't I know? What does it mean that Rabbi Ami certified him as a Kohen? To get Rishon? Rabbi Ami said, okay, in the young years of Rabbi Ami, now you can go ahead and get Rishon also. Like, is that what he was saying? Is it for duchening? Is it for truma? Is it for yichus? So remember, that this is always the part that's unknown. Next story. There was another guy, call him guy again, who came before Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. Amrlei, muchzani bazeh shehu Levi. I see this guy Moshe, he's a Levi. I know that he's a Levi. Amrlei ma rois. Rabbi Shimon Levi says, no, what did you see? How do you know he's a Levi? So Amar Lei, Shekara Shini Beis HaKnesses. Right? Becheskas Shul, so I'm sorry, Kar Shini Beis HaKnesses. I saw him get Sheni. He got the second Aliyah in Shul. Rabbi Shimon Levi says, 1 second. Becheskas Shul Levi, O Becheskas Shul Gadol. How do you know? Did he get it because he's a Levi? Or maybe he just got it because he's a chashav guy? In other words, I will say, apparently, there was a practice that there was a practice that you could give a great Talmid Chacham the Levi Aliyah. So you can give a great Talmid Chacham Kohen. You can also give a great Talmid Chacham Levi. So Rabbi Shimon Levi says to the guy, maybe he's not a Levi, maybe he's just a great Talmid Chacham. Shekar lefan of Kohen. No. I know because the guy who got Rishon was a Kohen. Guy who got Rishon was a Kohen. So therefore, it must be that this guy was a Levi. And therefore, as a result, Ve'alu Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi the Levi Alpiv. And Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi certified this guy as a Levi. So we'll say again, the Gemara is just bringing these stories because these are examples. These are, Rashi says over the Levia, Lo says lo Maiserishon, to give him Maiserishon, to give Levi Maiserishon. So we'll say, so again, the Pashta, so we would assume then the parallel would be that in the previous case, Rabbi Ami certified the Kohen to eat Truma. Okay. So I will say another story. So these are just all examples of Eidos on Chazaka, where someone is coming along and they are saying, so-and-so is a Kohen, so-and-so is a Levi, based on seeing them engage in Kohanic or Levitic behaviors. Next case, there was a guy who came before Reish Lakish, Amrle, Muchsakani Bazeshu Kohen. I know this guy is a Kohen. Amrle Marois, how do you know he's a Kohen? Amrle Shekari Isham Beis HaKnesses. Ultimately, again, because I saw him get the first Aliyah. So now watch this. So Reish Lakish says, so the guy comes before Reish Lakish, right? Again, guy says he saw Aaron. Aaron is a Kohen. How do you know Aaron is a Kohen? He got the first Aliyah. Reish Lakish says, let me ask you, Amrlei, Ra'isev Shechilek ala Granis. Did you see him get Truma? Did you see him get Truma? You saw him get Rishon, that's fine. Did you see him get Truma? Amrlo Rebbe Lazar. In Ein Sham Gorin Batla Kahuna. So what's Rebbe Lazar says, I don't understand. That's not a raya. And what happens in the place where this guy lives if there's no granaries? There's no granaries. So let's say again, the dispersing of trumas is very uncommon. So because he lives in a place where there's no granaries, therefore again, he can't be certified as a kohen. In other words, what Rebbe Lazar was saying over here is the absence of receiving truma shouldn't detract from his kohanic status. Because Lamaisa, again, you see what you see. In other words, the opportunities that are present are the opportunities that are present. If he lives in a place where there are not granaries, then what is he supposed to do? Look at Rashi. Im ein sham gorem, im ein sham zori tivua b'mkomo. Let's say there are no wheat fields in the place where this guy lives. So the absence of granaries should detract from his kohanic status. Yas v'kamei Rabbi Yochanan. Supposed to listen to this. Zimnin hav yasik kamei Rabbi Yochanan. Another time, Reish Lakish and Rabbi Lazar were sitting before Rabbi Yochanan. A similar story happened. Where a guy came, right? Guy came before them and wanted to say Aaron is a Kohen. How do you know that Aaron is a Kohen? Ultimately, again, because he got the first Aliyah in the shul. Amalei Reish Lakish says, Re'isiv shechilek alagorin. Did you see him receive truma? In other words, it's nice you saw him get the first Aliyah. Did you see him receive truma? Amalei Rabbi Yochanan said. Ein sham goren batla kahuna. Rabbi Yochanan said, and tell me, just because there are no granaries, the kahuna should be batla. In other words, Rabbi Yochanan is saying, if someone, let's say someone doesn't live in a place where there are granaries, so the absence of getting truma would invalidate that person's kohanic status. In other words, you look at the opportunities that are present in front of this kohen. He got rishon. I'm not worried about did he get truma or not. Now, I watch this. Just so you know what's happening over here. Rabbi Yochanan was Rabbi Lazar's Rebbe. Rebbe Lazar used the same exact terminology as his Rebbe. Watch this. Right in the first, remember again, in the first story, Rebbe Lazar was the one who said, "V'im ein sham goren batla kahuna." Now, and that was Rebbe Lazar and Reish Lakish. Now, Rebbe Lazar and Reish Lakish are together again in front of Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabbi Yochanan, the Rebbe, used the same lashon. Hadar chazil Rebbe Lazar bishos. Reish Lakish turns to Rebbe Lazar, and he looks at him angrily. Amar shamas mile de barnafcha, v'lo amart lan mishmei. You heard words, you heard something in the name of barnafcha. In other words, you heard something in the name of our Rebbe, Rabbi Yochanan, and you didn't bother to give it over in his name. In other words, Reish Lakish was surprised that Rabbi Lazar was effectively quoting his Rabbi Yochanan Bar Nafcha, and ultimately, again, he did not give proper attribution. So he was giving Musar to Belazar that clearly you were saying something over in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, but you did not give proper attribution. Incredible. Rabbi Chia, supposed to listen to this. Here we go. Rabbi Chia, Chad Hela ben Api Avav Lekuna. So we'll say a couple of very interesting cases. Let's go for another few minutes. Another few minutes. We have some time still. So we'll say, here we go. So I just want to point out, what have we not established yet, right? Great Gemaras, really incredible Gemaras, right? What have we not? First of all, I just want to point out from that statement of where Rabbi Yochanan and then Rabbi Elazar said that in Ein Sham Goren Batla Kahuna. So we'll say there's an incredible Musar Haskell of that. What's the Musar Haskell? So remember again, what was the case, right? Guy gets Rishon, right? And therefore, I will come, Aaron gets Rishon. And then Guy comes to testify from Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Elazar, that he's a Kohen. So Reish Lakish says, but did he get Meiser? I'm sorry, did he get Truma? So remember again, what does Rabbi Yochanan answer? Rabbi Yochanan says is that at the end of the day, how do you judge situations? Based on the information that's in front of you. Right? At the end of the day, he got Rishon. I can't start worrying if there are granaries or not granaries. Did he get Truma? Did he not get Truma? You know, in Halacha, there's a concept of Ein L'dayan Ladun Ela Mashe'in of Ros. A dayan, a judge, could only judge based on what he sees in front of him. So we had this last week's Daf. Could it be that there are other eidim somewhere else, other information somewhere else? It's always possible. But when we're making a decision, when that makes a decision, all he could do is what? Make a decision based on what's in front of him. So Rabbi Yochanan is saying, listen, did he get Truma? Didn't he get Truma? This guy's coming to Beis Din. He said, Aaron got the first Aliyah. That's what we're going to make our decision based on the information. And Rabbi said, why is this important? You know, because I think a lot of times in life, we make bad decisions. And the truth is, a lot of times in life, we really spend a lot of time hyper-focusing on those bad decisions of our past. And the truth is, it's important to sometimes know that what now becomes apparent as a bad decision didn't look like a bad decision when I made it. Right? At the time that I made it, I'm not a foolish person. I don't intentionally make bad decisions. At the time that I made the decision, it actually looked like the right decision to make. Now, in retrospect, I realize it was a terrible mistake. But when I made the decision with the information I had at hand. And I will say that has to be at least a chatzi nechama, a little bit of a consolation. Right? You could always look back. You could always, what's the Monday morning quarterback? Right? Hindsight is always 20/20. You could always look back retrospectively and see, oh, that decision was bad, that decision was bad. Okay, and I might be right. They were all bad decisions. But Lamaisa, in life, when I make a decision, all I have is the information I have at hand. Now, is it true that sometimes I don't think enough before making decisions? Sometimes I don't think enough before choosing a right derech? Absolutely. But I will say sometimes I do. Sometimes I really thought stuff out. But Lamaisa, it was still the wrong decision. But again, Kesuvos, Daf Chaf Hem at Beis, sometimes all you have to make decisions is the information you have in front of you. And we have to sometimes avoid the Yetzer Hara to constantly live in the past and beat ourselves up over decisions of the past. But remind ourselves, it was a bad decision. It didn't work out well, but I did the best that I could in that moment with the information I had at hand. Close the book on it and move yourself forward. The Gemara goes weiter. Rabbi Chia, Chad ha'ela ben api avav lekuna, v'chad ha'ela ach api ach l'levia. I'll say this is great. Two stories. Rabbi Chia. One established the Kohanic status of a son based on the testimony of his father, and one established a brother based as a Levi based on the testimony of his brother. Okay, what happened? This time, the Rebbe ha'ela ben api aviv lekuna. It must be Rebbe was the one who established the status of a son based on the testimony of his father. This sign, listen to this. The Kohen who the man comes to Beis Din and he says, "This is my son, and he's a Kohen. Ne'eman la'achila b'truma." He is believed to feed him truma. Now it's interesting. What does it sound a little bit like? almost like Pesha Asar Pesheter type of thing. In other words, we don't know this father and son relationship before us. A guy shows up in Beis Din, he says, hey, this is my kid. And what are we like? Okay, good for you, Mazel Tov, right? So let's say, see, he says, this is my kid, and I'm a Kohen, and therefore he's a Kohen, and I want to give him Truma. So the Gemara says, okay, that's fine. He's believed to say this is his son, and as a result, he's also believed to go ahead and feed him Truma. Now watch this. Ve'eno ne'eman lasio isha. Now Rabbi say, now what can't he do? He can't marry this boy off to a girl of untainted yichus, of untainted lineage. Why? Because I will say there is a concern when it comes to yuchsin. Maybe the kid is not his kid, and maybe the kid in fact is a mamzer, or in a sin, or something, or someone else. So interestingly enough, the father's testimony is enough to certify his kid as a Kohen for truma consumption purposes. Devrei Rebbe. These are the words of Rebbe. Amar lo Rebbe. Amar lo Rebbe Chia. Amar aminu la'achila b'truma. Taminu la'asiyah isha. Ve'miyah tam aminu la'asiyah isha. Lo saminu la'achal b'truma. Listen to this. Rebbe Chia says, Rebbe, I don't understand. It doesn't make sense. If you're going to believe the father's word that this kid is his son, to allow him to eat truma, then why wouldn't you believe him to what? To marry him off to a woman. And if you're not going to believe him to marry him off to a woman of proper yichus, then ultimately how can you believe him for truma? So which Rebbe says, Amar ani ma'aminu la'achila b'truma, shebiyado la'achila b'truma, ve'ini ma'aminu la'asiyah isha, she'im biyado la'asiyah isha. Rebbe says, Rebbe gives a very simple distinction. Rebbe says, listen, I believe the father for things that the father controls. What does the father control? Truma. Now remember, the father himself is a bona fide Kohen. So therefore, again, halacha l'maisa, the father is a bona fide Kohen. The truma is in his domain. He's claiming that this kid is his son. He controls all of the variables, all of the circumstances. And the only person that this testimony of impact is who? The father and the son. But the father's testimony is not going to be believed when it impacts someone else. What's an example of where it impacts someone else? What's an example of that? Marrying off his son to another woman. So again, if there's a woman of perfect yichus, then Lamaisa, we're not going to just accept the father's testimony that this is his kid and he's a Kohen and he's fine, because again, that testimony impacts someone else. Tistayim. So the Gemara says, you're right. So now we've proven, Rabbosai, that Rebbe was the one who allows a father, based on his testimony, to establish the Kohanic lineage of his own son. But again, just to be clear, that testimony has limitations. What does it work for? What does it work for? Truma. What doesn't it work for? Marriage. Good. So I will say ultimately again from the fact that Rebbe was the one who established the yichus of the Kohanic yichus of his son based on the testimony of his father for Kahuna, it must be therefore that Rebbe Chia was the one who allowed one brother to testify about his fellow brother to be a Levi. Rabbi, we'll stop over here for today. But Lemir Hashem pick up with the Levi case tomorrow. Shkoyach. All right, everyone have a wonderful, wonderful day. Great to see everyone. All right, Mr. Ringo, have a great day. David, safe travels. Richard, Michael, have a great day, everyone. Good morning. Bakhtia, thank you.